Let's start with the exit stage left of Gary Cohn from the White House. How do you recalibrate your thinking on policy here, economic policy, in light of his decision?
Well, I think it raises the uncertainty somewhat. Gary's views are well known in terms of trade policy and generally an approach that's more market-oriented in a number of areas. There is still a number of people with those views in the administration, but there's a little bit more uncertainty. We don't know who the new National Economic Council director is going to be. A number of names have been floated, but I think it's too early to tell. So I think what we do know is that there is a tariff step. The steel and aluminum tariffs will have some impact. They will, incrementally increase inflation, but so far the size of what we've seen in and of itself from a macro perspective isn't that big. The question is really what comes next, and I think it's a little too early to tell what the outcome is going to be.
I mean, you used the word modest here, less than 2% of US imports. In terms of a possible inflationary impact, you're saying 2 to 3 basis points. I mean, it's teeny tiny. The big question here is this the beginning of something far larger?
That's right. I mean, this is something that can have an impact that's meaningful on specific industries. If you look at areas like autos or consumer staples, it obviously makes more of an impact there. But from a macro perspective, this is not something that leads me to significantly recalibrate my thinking about what growth is going to be, or what the Fed's going to do, or what's going to happen to inflation at this point.
What about NAFTA? Because I think this is another angle that people will look at here. The Canadians are up in arms in particular as a result of this potential announcement, significant over tariffs. Are you more alarmed about the prospects for NAFTA here in light of Gary Cohn, but also obviously what we've seen in terms of tariffs?
Incrementally, yes, although we were already pretty concerned about an announcement that the U.S. might pull out of NAFTA. I mean, the probabilities of that have kind of gone up and down. We thought actually very early in the year that the risk of that was quite high. Then it seemed like that was taking a little bit more of a back seat again. Now, again, there are some additional questions about whether that's going to happen. Obviously, politically, there are also a number of problems for trade negotiations like NAFTA. We've got an election coming up in Mexico in July. We've got the U.S. midterms. So that risk is definitely out there.
What about China here as well? Because I keep bringing it back to Gary Cohn, but I feel like I need to. He was a strategic relationship manager with all of these countries, and I'm sure a lot of them are like, who do we deal with now? How concerned
they're going to have some of the same questions, I think, that you and I have, and we'll see how quickly we get more of a sense of who the White House spokesman for economic policy and for trade policy is going to be. And I think at the moment it's just harder to know because there are a number of different people who have a lot of influence in that area, but Gary was obviously the director of the NEC.
Step forward another Goldmanite, of course, Stephen Mnuchin, clearly in the hot seat probably at this point, as well as a negotiator. Tie all the threads together for me. As you said, you were already pretty alarmed about NAFTA. The impact ultimately in isolation of the tariffs on aluminium and steel, not that much of an impact as far as the US economy is concerned. Just give us your outlook, because we are talking about housing, finance, the consumer here in particular.
Yeah, we've talked about the risks and the negatives, but that shouldn't overshadow the fact
yes.
that not only that there are positives, but also that our overall outlook for the global economy and the US economy is quite positive. We think the global economy is, growing in the 4% range, maybe even a little bit better. You look at some of the high frequency indicators that we monitor, and those numbers have been even stronger. The US is growing, we think between 2.5% and 3%, well above trend. The unemployment rate's coming down from levels that are already very low. We're getting a fiscal boost, so maybe the financial conditions boost that helped us last year is going to be a little smaller this year, but we're getting the fiscal boost, which wasn't there last year. So, I think it's still a very robust outlook, and probably an outlook for gradual increases in inflation and continued gradual increases in interest rates. That's probably our strongest view if you look at where we are relative to others or where the market's priced, that we think the Fed's probably going to hike the funds rate quite a bit more than most think. We have 4 hikes this year, 4 hikes next year.